Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live in the studio with me today, I have Luther Mercer. Luther is the Memphis Advocacy Director for the Tennessee Charter School Center. Luther brings a wealth of background and experience, having worked in education, government relations, and policy for over 15 years. Luther holds degrees from Tennessee Technological University and Cecil C. Humphreys School of Law. He studied international trade law, international criminal law, and the Islamic legal system at American University in Cairo. He holds certificates in TEFL methodology and Mandarin Chinese and culture from Beijing University and an instructor's license in entrepreneurship training from the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, Missouri. Luther, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
You know, the vision of the Tennessee Charter School Center, where you work, is for all students in Tennessee to have access to high-quality public education. And, I'd love to learn a little more from you because I don't know a ton about your organization. I'd love to know, how do you go about achieving that goal?
Well, first, again, thank you for having me. The Tennessee Charter School Center, as it stands, is an organization that's a policy advocacy institute.
Okay.
And we work in the areas of legislation. We lobby on the Hill, meet with legislatures, and work with legislatures around charter work, meaning charter legislation.
Okay.
We also advocate on behalf of charters here in the state, meaning we go and speak with, for example, in my role, work with districts to create and support charters in their work and work with the districts to help facilitate that. So,
Right.
for example, there may be issues around facilities or issues around a charter being getting set up and authorized by the district. And so we may work with the district in that way. We may work in talking with them about important issues concerning shared services or funding that may be that's supposed to be allocated to charter schools, that there may be questions around whether that full allocation is being given. There are a lot of different areas that we operate in and function in, but we work to create, as you just stated, high quality performing charter schools in the state.
Can you talk a little bit about why charter schools are important, like what their role is in sort of the educational ecosystem?
Well, I think let's step back for a second. I think that what happened in our educational environment in the United States is that somewhere around 80s, we began to look at our system and really begin to see where we needed to transform it. And there were ideas that began to arise. And in the 90s, of course, charters were one of those ideas. And what I think charters offers in a public school arena is choice. And you may not know some details around how charters operate, but the traditional district here in Shelby County Schools authorizes that charter to operate within a space. That charter school is then set up, and then it has it creates its own board. It has its own curriculum and the way in which it innovates that curriculum. Now, it still has to adhere to state standards, but the opportunity to really cultivate a curriculum and a system that meets the needs of the children that they're serving is a dynamic that allows for innovation in the space. And this is something that across the country, charters, as they're being implemented, were being looked at as an opportunity to reinvent and look at how we could better serve our children in the public school education arena.
Yeah, that's great. So is a charter school, do you think of it similar to a magnet school, or is it depends?
No. I consider it to be a different model.
Okay.
It's a different model. Now, magnets have some similar things in what they do, but
Sure.
charters can operate in a different way than magnets. And again, some of the things I just mentioned earlier about that innovation space, which allows for them to then engage, again, their student population in the things that they need specifically.
Right.
And it's again, it's been successful. Again, there's always challenges
Sure.
when you're trying to innovate in a space where a system has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
But we have seen some great things here in Memphis. For example, we've got about 66 charters now here in Memphis, Tennessee.
Wow.
45 of those are licensed or authorized. They're authorized under under Shelby County Schools, and then the others are part of a system called the ASD, the Achievement School District, that was set up by the state of Tennessee.
Okay. So once they're authorized, does it mean that they get additional funding or they get other perks or something?
No. They get in the state of Tennessee, you have what's called the Basic Education Program, which is the BEP, which is the funding per pupil for a student. And so charters receive, for the amount of students that come in, let's just say this year a charter had opened up and it has 100 students, it would get the per pupil amount for each student that came to them out of that 100. So,
that's great. Well, I mentioned in the introduction that you are the advocacy director there.
Yes.
Could you help us understand a little bit about, what your role is and kind of what it encompasses?
Well, my job, I work with Shelby County Schools. There's the charter office at the Shelby County Schools.
Okay.
There's also several other offices. I work with several of them, like the policy office and the CFO, other members of the district. Then I also work to talk with the Shelby County School Board. I also work with the County Commission. In these areas, with the school board and the County Commission, is a lot of times advocacy on the part of some of the charter leaders, working around what we are seeing in the charter space is needed. Also informing. There may be some issues that the school board or the county commission may not be aware of. And so therefore being there to support and getting understanding around what those issues may be and getting a sense of kind of that educational landscape regarding charters. So I do that as well. The Charter Center also operates on the legislative level. So there are sometimes I'm in contact with local legislators here around charters, what's happening. Some of the legislators may be working on education funding on the state level, so talking with them about issues. And then there's kind of a coalition of other members here of other organizations that I also talk with around the work, helping to support. And so that's kind of the overview. But there's a lot of, as you say, nuances in there that also I operate in as they come forward.
Yeah, sure. So what about the organization, attracted you? I mean, why did you decide to get involved? Because you've done a lot of different things over the course of your career.
It's interesting. What's that saying that man plan, God laughs. And I think I fell a little bit into that space. I went to law school, and while in law school, my thought was I'm going to go off and be, this is corporate attorney and go do some things. And kind of midway through law school, began to question and say, how can I be more proactive? My mother had been involved in the civil rights movement and also a teacher, and also was field director for a congressman and served on boards and started nonprofits. And so, I had this I guess already this background that had been subliminally put into me that I needed to be in spaces that were proactive and engaging and making a difference. And so somewhere around in law school, I set upon myself to start looking at other opportunities that were out there. And there's a long story. I don't know if you want to go through that part because I want to specifically answer your question. There was a long story to get into the charter space. But what I saw to answer specifically your question, was I saw a need, and I know what education has done for me, and I began to, again, I had revolved around education for a long time. The opportunity presented itself to come in and be an advocate within a space where I really believe we now are at a crucial time where we need to have conversations on how we can make changes, how we can innovate, how we can make a difference in the charter. And charters is one of those options that are out there. And I was just, I'm honored that our CEO, Maya Bug, she had come on board, and she and I got an opportunity to talk about the work and her vision for where she wanted to take the charter school center, and then how it was going to impact our community. And I said, look, let's do it. I mean, I was already enthralled to be, in this space to try to find ways to help. And this was just the opportunity presented itself, and I'm thankful for it.
Oh, that's great. So were you already on the path with education at that point?
Yes. Let me, I guess, to give you a little background. Again, I went to law school here, and then I went to law school in Egypt. And I studied international trade, international criminal law, and the Islamic legal system. And so I got kind of a bug by being overseas studying, and spent some time in Israel. I was in Haifa, Jerusalem, Bethlehem. Came back and finished up the last year of law school, and went to China for 2 years. And when I went to China, I was invited there to work with the Shenzhen Education Bureau. And it was just an opportunity that came completely out of nowhere while I was in my last year of law school, excuse me. And I go work for the Shenzhen Education Bureau and help to work on a kind of curriculum piece as well as taught. And I got the bug. Then I left, and I kind of wanted to improve my Chinese, so I went to Beijing University for a year, studied Chinese, and then also taught at Beijing University. Wow. And so that's where my kind of education lens began. So I came back and went to the University of Tennessee at Martin. I directed an office there for a while, and did another educational project in Tanzania. And so it was kind of a research project, social, political, economic system. And when I came back, I kind of diverted for a minute. I said, well, okay, I've done this education thing. And so I went to work for a think tank and did policy work around prosecutorial discretion on the federal level, specifically looking at, the differentiations of how prosecutors were choosing to charge. And so did some little bit of work in North Carolina, focus groups in Detroit, here, had some meetings and some other things with the Department of Justice in Washington. And after working with that think tank, we finished up, did a white paper. I thought I was, okay, now maybe I just may move into this realm. And so started doing some consulting work, did some other projects. And when I had come back to Memphis, and my, my family, again, is from Jackson, Tennessee. So I was like, well, I want to stick around this area. And some reason, education kind of came up again. And I was like, okay, well, do I want to really do this again? Do I want to go off and kind of go back into the international realm, go do some other things? Well, long story short, St. George's Independent School here, met with a gentleman named Rick Ferguson, who had been with them for a long time. And Rick said, hey, look, you've had a unique set of experiences and want you to meet the head of school. I think it'd be a good opportunity to engage. And I was like, well, okay, let's see. Well, let's look and see what's going on. And went out, and St. George's was doing something unique at the time that I said, they're moving in a direction. I think I have something to offer. And so I came on board to help build out this global education program, and then to head this what's called the Institute for Citizenship. So it dealt with civic awareness and ethical responsibility on a local, national, global, and environmental level. And so I was the founding director of that program and built it out. And got a chance to begin conversations with people who were in the education reform movement during that time. And so met with a lot of charter leaders, people who were at foundations, who were working with some of these issues. And I said, St. George's was great. And make no mistake about it, wonderful school, wonderful environment. Those children are going to be okay.
Right.
They are. And so I started kind of a conversation with a few around, I wonder what I could do. I mean, how can I get involved? And at the time, there are a lot of things in the space of education reform. One of them was also in the area of leadership.
Okay.
And so a gentleman I knew had just come on board as the executive director of New Leaders, which is an organization that headquartered out of New York, but it works to transform areas of principal leadership, teacher leadership in public schools. And so I came on managing director of programs for New Leaders, and was there for a good considerable time, around a year or so, kind of helping to work those things. And the opportunity of a change came up with New Leaders. And I was like, well, that's not what I'm really interested in, that change. But what came along was this opportunity to go over to be advocacy director for the Tennessee Charter School Center and get more in the space of working with charter leaders, working with the district to help advance their work. And so that's the road. Yeah, again, a lot of other there's a lot of gaps in there, that I could tell you a lot of different other kind of pathways and other things that I did, but that's kind of the part of the journey to get to this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I'm curious, you mentioned that you taught a little bit. What did you teach?
Where? I taught in China, and then I taught at as an adjunct kind of facilitator at Bethel University. Then I taught at St. George's. Okay. So in China, taught English. Okay. Both times at the university, and also when I was helping with at Shenzhen Education Bureau, taught at a school called Shenzhen Middle School, and then at Beijing University at their Chongping campus, I taught English. Okay. And then when coming back at St. George's, I taught history. Okay. And then I also taught globalization. Okay. And then I also taught a class called citizenship. And then at Bethel, as a facilitator, I worked I taught kind of ethics, governmental affairs, business, and then there was an international kind of globalization, international business course that I taught.
Oh, that's interesting. So, and I'm curious too, what did your mother teach?
Well, she actually taught biology, just taught PE. But yeah, so for whatever reason, she taught that. Yeah, I didn't go in that space, neither did my sister, around biology or anything. But she, I think the political side and the social justice side was something that was reinforced over and over as I was growing up, and I think that ended up filtering through kept pulling me back over to spaces, and I kept finding myself back in spaces having conversations around this. So even at St. George's in my citizenship course, that citizenship course was basically about looking at the world that we are in and our responsibility to our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so one of the things that's interesting about your background, you've had a lot of different roles, you've lived in a lot of different cities, you've worked in different spaces, and you're able to kind of connect it now and to kind of explain the path. But what do you think about sort of yourself that has allowed you to take this kind of path? Because a lot of people, when they're looking for a job or they're soul searching, they really struggle with, how can I create that kind of path for myself? What do you think it is about you that has allowed you to kind of take this path?
I think what has allowed me to do it is being open. That's one. I've had a great education. Again, I think that's one of the reasons why I float back and forth within that space of, because I know the importance of it. I think those are two things that are there. One of the things that I think we get fixed a lot of times on the way in which we look at the world and how we think we should be engaged in the world. Also, we have been defined largely by societal archetypes of what you should do and how you should do it. And these things never mattered to me. You know, I was always one that said, okay, well, you know, this is what I want to do, and I think this is what's going to fulfill me right now. This is what's happening, or this is what opportunity is being presented. You know, a lot of factors that play into how you get to a certain place. A lot of variables. I also, in that idea of not being fixed, is a lot of ways in which I engage, which I think allows me to engage the work I do in a way that I don't see a particular end to something. I see that there's many paths. And so whenever I go into a position, that's also, I don't walk in with kind of a fixed construct. And so from that, not having that fixed construct, I think the way my mind works, it also works and applies in the job context as well, of how I see, you know, why I've gotten all these skills that are tangible but also intangible, and then they're also transferable. And so it just allows for choice and opportunity to be able to look at the world, I think, broadly. And that's kind of, I guess, my paradigm or way I look at things and how I engaged in the work I do.
No, that's great. You know, it's a really common theme when I talk to people who have had a long, successful career and they've accomplished a lot of different things. When I ask this question, I think pretty much every time I've ever asked it, the thing they say is that they feel like they're open. And it does seem to make a big difference. You know, when I work with job seekers who are looking, I can tell pretty quickly how easy or how hard it's going to be for them to find something, because the people who are open to trying something new, who are open to getting outside their comfort zone, who are open to suggestion, those people seem to find their path like pretty quickly. It's not that they don't know themselves, but they're not afraid. And then I sometimes will talk to people who have a lot of excuses. They've thought of all the reasons things won't work. You know, they will still find a job. It will still work out, but it typically seems to be harder on those people because they are not as open. And so that's really, it's quite interesting. Did you ever have the idea in your head that, you know, well, I know at least growing up, there was an expectation that you work a corporate job and you work it for so many years and then you retire from that job. Did you hear that at some point?
Did I hear that? No.
I mean, did you ever feel that way initially? Because you've done a very non-traditional route, which is awesome.
I think, no, I can't remember a time where I ever felt like I'm going to go work somewhere for 20 years or whatever. I don't think that was ever talked about to me.
That's interesting.
Yeah. My mother, again, a dynamic woman, amazing lady. My father, great man. I think that, but my mother, you know, was kind of, I grew up in the household with just, you know, she was just that strong woman, you know, and I never knew anything different. It was like, oh, okay, you know, strong man, strong woman, that's it. And so she always talked about independence. She always talked about you have a responsibility to the community, social justice. But then she also talked about, you know, you being fulfilled and achieving your goals and whatever that may be. Now, let me say this. Now, on some of the things that I've done, she's been one like, whoa, what are you doing? You know, she's questioned. She's like, wait. I don't know. Is that choice you're making? What are you about to do? I think that's been there, but not only myself, but my sister as well. Just, you know, we just non-traditional. I remember my sister was on a path in corporate, and she decided, well, all right, I'm starting my own business. You know, she just left and started her own HR firm and consulting firm, and she's been rolling now for what, almost 10, 12 years. And just, you know, I think that's just, it was a blessing to have family and people around who just said, take the risk, you know, jump. But then once you jump, they would question, like, why did you jump? But I think that's also just the nature of mothers, you know, trying to make sure that their children are, okay. But no, non-traditional was definitely something I was taught no.
Oh, that's great. So one thing that's interesting too, with regards to the teaching, when, you've taught multiple times, you mentioned, but I don't think that you have a degree in teaching. Is that right?
No, I don't.
So for those who may be listening, for those of us who are interested in teaching, because I do actually talk to a lot of people who maybe they've had a corporate career, they've had some other career, and they've come around and they've said, I really want to do something more fulfilling, and I'd like to do something where I get to teach, but I don't know how to do it. What advice would you have for that person who they have a good degree, but they don't have the teaching degree?
I think the first is there's a lot of opportunities to teach. We think of teaching only standing in the classroom. I mean, there's a lot of other options out there to engage. So that's one, being open to what other methods may be out there, whether being a mentor, whether it being a speaker, using the outreach from the jobs that they're in to go and engage in classrooms. I know there are, I do not know a school in this city, for example, that would not open themselves to having a person from, let's say, FedEx or International Paper or, let's say, banking or whatever, say, hey, look, I'd like to take time to come out and speak to your kids, and teach them about what's going on or help in any way. I just don't know that they will not be turned away. I just firmly believe that. Now, if you're looking forward to take on it as a career or job, the option of going into kind of traditional public, of course, you get certificate and, do those things. In private school, that's not, you don't have to do that.
Oh, really?
No. So there's an option there where, for example, at the school, St. George's, where I was, there were people who had left FedEx at one time. There were people who left Medtronic. There were people who left the business world, marketing strategy, to come in and work at the school. I know I myself, there were 2 other lawyers there at one time at the school. So, that option is there. Also looking at it from a charter perspective, having, going by and talking to charter leaders about, what you would like to do and how you could do it. Sure, there may be a level of professional development that needs to take place, just, learning class management and, other things that are important to kind of getting a sense of how do you work within a class environment. But I think actually, I'm going to step out on my opinion. I do believe in the future, it's getting licensed to teach and learning how to teach is one thing. Going out into the world, having a job, gaining experiences and skill sets and perspective, and bringing that into the classroom is totally different. And I think that's something that's going to be evolved in the future, because I think it really will help in the context of moving the educational sphere, because you now have this other dynamic coming into that space to help improve learning. Real quick, there was a lady who was she was in corporate for a long time, and I remember going into her geometry class, and I walked in and sitting down, and kids were kind of looking around and weren't really paying attention. And she said, all right, I'm going to stop right here. And I can't remember what theorem she was teaching, but she said, I needed new carpet in my home. And so had these 3 people come by, and they all gave these estimates, and I did my own measurements when they left, and I figured out that there was one who was dead on, the others were trying to overcharge me. So I chose him, and one of the students raised their hand and said, so you mean I could use this to figure out, how something costs for me to work? She said, yes. And he perked up. A few others perked up. And then she said she gave other real world examples of how this would work. And all of a sudden you had these students like, oh, so she taught from that point through examples of real world application. And that, I think, is another element of change where in our educational field, I think sometimes students are kind of lost because it's all vague and ambiguous. Like, okay, I learned this theorem. Okay, for what? Or I learned this formula for what? Okay, what does it mean? Why does it matter? How do you apply it? Then you get into a different space where, oh, okay, now I can see this relevant to my life. Okay. So I think a person coming out of a different sector shouldn't be afraid because of the things that they have could be greatly valuable for an application in the educational sphere.
Absolutely. I think that's excellent advice. So just to kind of, continue on that sort of thought process, say we're interested to get involved with the education system, but maybe teaching is not our thing. Are there other kinds of opportunities that we might consider where we get to help and give back to the schools, but maybe we're not necessarily in the classroom?
I would say a big thing needed now is advocacy around supporting change in the educational environment. And so for those who are interested in thinking about, going to school board meetings and reaching out to commission and talking from maybe their lens of business or other areas, technology, what is needed and what they're seeing, lending a voice to the conversation about perspectives that may not be in the sphere I just think is extremely important. And that's just something small that you do.
Well, what if we don't have children? Do we need to have children to get involved?
No. Well, I would say that let me assume that all of us understand the value of education. I'm going to go ahead and put that as an assumption.
Right.
And because of that, no.
Okay.
You don't need to have children. You just need to care. And you need to believe that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the other thing about your background that really strikes me, it feels like a piece, and I could be wrong, but it feels like a piece of what you're really passionate about is the policy piece.
Yes.
And I talk with people often who are interested to get into policy, who, whether they live in D.C. or they live here, and they just aren't really sure where to begin. For someone who is really interested to have sort of this kind of career like you have had where you've gotten a chance to be involved in policy, what is kind of a first step or something they might do to start to be involved?
First step to get involved in policy. That's a little tough. The reason I say that is because let me not say what is a first step. Let me say what are some things you
That'd be
can
great,
do.
yeah.
So, a lot of people I would recommend them to find what they're passionate about. What is it that you really care about and thinking about? Hopefully it's education. In that, it's now time to kind of learn about what's happening in your community around that educational piece. And then from there, finding your voice and what you could see bringing to the table about how to improve it. And that's very vague and open because it's really, 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 really dependent on the individual. But another thing is learning about it. One thing I have seen, there are people who are extremely passionate about issues and want to jump into policy, but don't do the necessary work of educating themselves on the current policy or what's happened before.
Okay.
In order to be able to say, okay, now that I have a framework and lens, now I can hopefully talk about things in a future context of how to make it better. What they jump in usually with are opinions. And again, opinions like noses, everybody's got one. I think that along our discourse, it may be from politics, it may be from pop culture, that we got into this place where opinion absent of fact and evidence is valid. I know that may not be part of our talk today, but I'm just going to go ahead and put my 2 cents in and say, no, that is not correct. So when you're jumping into the space of policy, please educate yourself on the issues, learn about it, gain the facts, then be able to thoughtfully engage it to really be transformative. I think that we have suffered a great deal in that realm where people, again, passionate, good-hearted, good-hearted people really want to make a change, but there needs to be the work to go along with that to really engage and really make the difference. So I would also, that's something else in that realm I would really recommend that people do.
Well, it makes sense because, in order to get the respect of those who you're really approaching, for help or to say, hey, I want to get involved, having done your homework, whether it's in this space or any other business space, you're more likely to get respect when you know what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And you've done the work to learn more about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, just maybe one other question, and that is, many of the opportunities that you kind of discussed about your career, it sounded like there were times where someone approached you with an opportunity and that you were open to that opportunity. How much, has networking, for example, played into your career success and sort of your progression?
I think it's played in a great deal. I think that I'm engaged. I know we met at the Economic Club meeting and had a discussion around education here in the city, and then the work of the Tennessee Charter School Center. And so that began a conversation about, hey, how about we get on and talk about it? That's how important it is. And I think I appreciate LinkedIn. I appreciate the new social mediums, Monster. But from what I've seen in the landscape, that it will only take you to a certain point. That's it. And they're more entry level stuff. They're more kind of beginning process. But when you're talking about, hey, I want to advance in my work. I want to advance and go into these different realms. I want to do some different things. That requires you to put yourself out there and really meet people, talk with people, get to know people, take time to do something as we're talking about right here, to meet with you and discuss issues and then say, okay, well, guess what? I just made a new friend. She knows me. I know her now. Somebody may call me tomorrow and say, hey, by the way, I was really thinking about jobs and ideas of jobs. And I said, hey, have you listened to Angela Copeland's show? And, she talks about that and job seekers and what they need to do. No, I didn't. And so, it's these types of things that help people to grow. And so networking and relationships, I would say, are extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's the willingness to be open, even if you might not get something out of it right away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I do want to, as you were saying, get something out of it. I do want to talk to people a little bit about that, don't always go into it trying to get something. To build out relationships with people, get to know people, because it's, you may there may be something grand that comes out of it, or may not. But still, in that building of relationships and building of that community, there's a lot of things that you will find that you learn, and you will find that you grow, and then there may be opportunities that come out of it as well. And I think that's the beauty of it. It may not be opportunities today. It may be opportunities 10 years from now. Somebody's sitting around like, hey, you know what? I know somebody 10 years ago, and it goes from there. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
I totally agree. Occasionally, I will talk to a job seeker and I will encourage them to say, go meet with someone at FedEx because maybe they're interested to work there. And they'll say, well, but that department doesn't have a job opening right now. Well, you don't want to meet them the very first time you meet them. You are coming asking for a job.
Correct.
You want to meet them way before they have the job. And then they may even call you, as you've experienced. When they have a job, they think of you and they reach out to you. So I think that's really sound advice. We've covered a lot of different topics, and I really appreciate it. I think it's going to be very helpful for our listeners who are interested in education, as well as listeners who are interested in policy, listeners who are interested in just transitioning their career in general. You have a really unique career, and so I appreciate you sharing. In terms of the Tennessee Charter School Center, where can our listeners go to learn more about the Tennessee Charter School Center?
You can learn more about the Tennessee Charter School Center at tnchartercenter.org.
Okay.
You could also email me at Luther, Luther, at tnchartercenter.org. There's a lot of information out there. Again, we've got a dynamic CEO, Maya Bug, great team in Nashville. We're also building out more teams, people here in Memphis, but we are all open. So even if you go on the website and you see other people that you'd like to contact, everyone in the organization would love to talk to you about their work, their experience, what they're doing, and why they're part of, education reform and what they saw in it. And so I think it's a great opportunity for people to really understand, and also local people as well as statewide to understand about what's going on in the state from the center.
Great. Well, Luther, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher so you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.